Hello, it's Ginger Red here. I want to say first of all, sorry for the lighting. I can't turn on that light because it's like a ray of light. I think I feel like you can almost see it from the other light now, but like a ray of light in front of the screen. I don't know what that's all about. So I have another light on, but it's not as good. But I want to talk about this book. It's called On the Genealogy of Morals. It's right here. I read it in English. It's from Friedrich Nietzsche, and it was written probably in the late 19th century. And yeah, so it's a book of about 160 pages, and it goes through kind of much of what you would expect on the genealogy of morals, where that's very intriguing, going over kind of like what he believes is how he believed that morality kind of, at least today's morality kind of developed. That it's actually composed of three essays. It is one body of work. It is one book that he is not some people after he died who compiled it. It is his work, put together by himself. That there are three essays. The third one is actually a little bit. I'm not gonna say misplaced because it's definitely not misplaced. It's just like I don't think it has as much to do with on the genealogy of morals as the two other essays. But the first essay kind of goes over. It's called Good and Evil, Good and Bad. You can see it right here. Good and Evil, Good and Bad. And on this essay, he kind of goes over what he says about slave morality. You probably heard the term. It's a very easy one to misunderstand because sometimes it can seem like it's just Nietzsche bashing on like homeless people or whatever. Nietzsche bashing on like poor people. It goes over kind of how he believes that the current morality, which he so much hated, developed through kind of slave morality, where it's like the slaves viewed the slave masters, the people kind of above them socially, slave masters as evil and bad, and not good, and they viewed themselves as being good, benevolent. Those values are the good ones, and the opposite is true as well, where the slave owners kind of viewed the slaves as the bad ones. The reason why they did that was because they weren't useful. Like they had no real useful qualities to them, at least, and in general, at least in this society that they were living in. And so they kind of started to view them as, the slaves as bad and themselves as good. And so it's a pretty interesting theory. I feel like you'd have to ask, I don't know. I mean, probably a philosopher. So I guess it makes sense. But it's a pretty interesting theory of how that could have developed. So basically, he's saying that it developed through this like slave morality, where the slaves, especially from that, well, where the slaves viewed the slave owners as being bad, and that same essay goes very much like it has a lot to do with the second essay, which I'm just gonna show. It's called Guilt, Bad Conscience, and the Like. You can see it right here. Guilt, Bad Conscience, and the Like. And this essay is to me the most interesting one of them all, because here he goes over how he thinks that guilt and bad conscience kind of developed. Because he's saying basically we don't have that just to have it. I mean it developed, and it developed through society, but also before even society even occurred. And he's saying basically, for example, with guilt, the reason why we feel guilty when we hurt somebody else, we might feel guilty, is because that we've learned through kind of through evolution, not just genetic evolution, but especially genetic evolution. There are other kind of ways to use the term, but especially genetic evolution, that if we hurt somebody else, then that's bad for us. And so the people who got kind of bad conscience, the people who for some reason felt bad when they hurt somebody else, it was kind of their genes who survived. And that's why we feel guilt. That's why we feel bad conscience, is because it's a purely selfish thing. And he even says it relatively directly. Yeah, how much evil, how much selfish, egotistical things have come from the current moral values that we have now. The third essay in the book is a little bit it's a little bit, as I said, I'm not even sure if it's, but it's like misplaced almost. I'm not completely sure if that's the right word, but basically the third essay goes over like the aesthetic values, and it's called basically what is the meaning, as you can see, what is the meaning of the aesthetic values. And so if you don't know the aesthetic value, asceticism is basically just when you live free of kind of material pleasures, kind of. You try to not try to not engage so much in material activities, that kind of thing. And Nietzsche basically says that the reason why people don't do that, the reason why some people live an ascetic lifestyle is because it's like, it's like that intellectual gene, or like more like that intellectual instinct. As that's actually the term he uses directly. The intellectual instinct, it kind of trumps all the other instincts, and people eventually, if they're like intellectual enough, they kind of start to view all sorts of material pleasures, material activities, and so on as a burden, and like as a distraction from their main instinct, which is their intellect. The intellect is their main instinct. That's the main thing they want to engage you with. They want to have more privacy, kind of. They want to have more time away from everything else that can destroy them, that can distract them from what they want to engage in with the most, and that is kind of their intellect, right, and their thoughts and all that. And I think that's a pretty, interesting, pretty reasonable, I think. But he doesn't support it. It might seem like, he himself would support it after that explanation, but he doesn't support it. He says that it's basically a rejection of life, which is why he criticizes the ascetic ideals. Like a rejection of life, one step closer to nihilism, he says. And generally speaking, I think it's pretty interesting, because when I was going to read that that essay, I was thinking, all right, don't think there's much bad about the ascetic lifestyle. I mean, you can choose not to live it, but generally speaking, I don't think I don't think there's much to criticize. But that, his criticism of it in that essay is actually very good. It's actually very he presents many good arguments for that idea, I think. And he does that for them all, for all of these three essays. I mean, if you want to learn about where, definitely a different kind of perspective. I mean, this is a unique perspective in this first essay, good and evil, good and bad. This is a unique essay, it's a unique perspective that he comes forth with, of how nowadays morality kind of was developed. But it's not necessarily a bad perspective. I mean, you don't think that that's completely ridiculous or anything like that. And he presents many good arguments. And on the second essay, with guilt and bad conscience, it does the same thing. And it's, it's not as unique a perspective that the reason we feel guilt is because we've learned that that's bad for us. But it's still, it's not like that's accepted by most people, like the average person, that's why we feel guilty, that's why we feel empathy, bad conscience, and so on. And also of the aesthetic values, if you want to learn about the aesthetic values, the third essay is very good. Overall, it's a very good book. I don't know how hard this is to read, to be completely honest. I mean, you can see this is how it looks on average, right? So that's it's not like there's a ridiculous amount of text on each page. The book itself, which I'm holding right now, is relatively small, so it's not very difficult to read. But I do think you should probably have some knowledge of philosophy before reading it. But it's not overall it's not that difficult, although it is very old kind of language. It's very old language, but it's not so old that you can't understand it, but it is so old, and it is so formal and well written that you will improve your vocabulary, you will learn new words and so on, and that's pretty good. And it's also like it can be a bit hard to read because sometimes it's written slightly in a cryptic way, and sometimes it's obviously heavy arguments and topics that he's talking about, and so you might experience if you read it, like reading half a page, for example, and then you're like, oh, I don't even understand what I just read, and then you're just kind of like, yeah, without even noticing it, I just read half a page where I didn't even think about it, so you had to kind of read it again. That can happen. You probably cannot read this whole book in like full and then just completely understand. You could do that, but you would get a lot more from it than to just kind of think about it a bit more, and also sometimes to read the page again and that kind of thing. So even though it's only 160 pages, it does take a bit of time to read. But overall, I mean, I don't know how quickly you can get it done. It really depends on how good your vocabulary is and that kind of thing. But overall, very good book. Probably like 9 out of 10 book. It's not his magnum opus, as they say. I think that would be Zarathustra, but I've never read that book, so I can't really comment on it. But definitely, this is an amazing book. I'm reading also another book from Nietzsche called Beyond Good and Evil, and I love it, but it's not as good, I don't think. I just learned a lot from this book, but I think that was it. That was my video. I don't think I have much else to say. I just want to talk about that book quickly because I want to do like a review of all the books I've read that I have still. So yeah, basically I just want to say thank you for watching, and see you in another video. Thank you.